NAZCA lines from the ground. What were they for the mystery of Peru's desert drawings? The desert of southern Peru is unlike any other place on Earth. A vast plateau stretches out beneath a relentless sun, its surface cracked and barren, a world of silence where even the wind seems to move cautiously. To stand here is to feel exposed, between an endless sky and a ground that appears lifeless, unchanging, eternal. Yet hidden within this emptiness lies one of the most extraordinary mysteries of the ancient world. At first, the land seems featureless, but then, as your eyes adjust, something unexpected appears beneath your feet. A shallow groove carved into the desert surface. A line. You follow it a few steps and it keeps going perfectly straight, extending far into the horizon. Soon, you notice another, then another, crossing the plain like scars written into the earth. Some stretch for miles without faltering, others bend and curve, forming geometric shapes, spirals and trapezoids. And then, out of the silence, they begin to form figures. Immense animals, birds, and strange beings, etched on a scale so vast that from the ground they seem almost invisible. A hummingbird with wings spanning nearly the length of 2 football fields. A monkey twisting its tail into a spiral larger than a city block. A spider so enormous that walking its legs would take minutes. From here they are only fragments, partial outlines disappearing into the horizon. But when seen together from far above, they reveal something astonishing. Designs so precise, so deliberate, that their creators must have had a purpose far beyond mere decoration. These are the NAZCA lines, one of humanity's greatest enigmas. Created between 500 BCE and 500 CE, they have survived more than 1,000 years of history, preserved by the desert itself. No rain washes them away, no vegetation covers their form, and no storms disturb their silence. They endure, like a message frozen in time, waiting for someone to understand. But here lies the paradox. The NAZCA people never flew. They had no airplanes, no balloons, no vantage point from which to see their creations in full. From the ground, these geoglyphs dissolve into confusion, incomprehensible in their totality. So why carve them? Why devote such immense labor across generations to create designs that could not be seen? This question has fascinated explorers, archaeologists, and dreamers for centuries. Were the lines astronomical calendars, aligning human ritual with the cycles of the sun and stars? Were they prayers etched into the desert, desperate pleas for rain in a land where water was life itself? Were they maps of sacred springs hidden beneath the ground, or messages for gods believed to dwell in the sky? Or were they something else entirely? Messages not for their own time, but for us, the distant future. Who would one day stand in the desert and marvel at their endurance? The mystery of the NAZCA lines is not only in their creation, but in their persistence. How does a society without writing leave behind such a vast archive of meaning? How does a culture struggling for survival invest such energy in works that seem impractical, intangible, almost impossible? And why, even after decades of research, do the lines continue to defy simple explanation? Tonight, we will walk these lines step by step, not from the sky, where drones and satellites give us easy views, but from the ground, where the NAZCA themselves once stood. We will enter their world, a world where deserts spoke, where gods demanded devotion, where survival depended on rituals that bound heaven and earth together. We will examine the people who carved the lines, the methods they used, the myths that shaped their meaning, and the theories that continue to fuel debate. The NAZCA lines are more than ancient art. They are questions carved into the earth, questions that reach across centuries to confront us. In their silence, they remind us that mystery is not an obstacle to knowledge, but a bridge between past and present, between humanity and the unknown. And so our journey begins, not with answers, but with the desert itself, and with the people who chose to carve their prayers into its silence. A world carved in silence. Long before the Nazca lines were carved into the desert floor, a people had to learn how to survive in one of the harshest landscapes on Earth. The southern coast of Peru, where the Nazca flourished, is a place where the desert meets the Andes and the Pacific Ocean. Rain is almost non-existent, rivers are rare and seasonal, and the land appears inhospitable. To outsiders, this environment might seem unlivable. Yet the Nazca not only survived here, they created a culture so enduring that it left behind one of humanity's greatest mysteries. Archaeological evidence paints a picture of resilience and ingenuity. The Nazca cultivated maize, beans, peanuts, and squash, and they grew cotton for their textiles. They relied heavily on advanced irrigation systems, the most remarkable of which were the puquios. These spiral-shaped aqueducts tunneled deep underground, tapping hidden water reserves and channeling them toward the fields. Even today, centuries after the Nazca civilization collapsed, some of these systems still function. The puquios stand as silent monuments to their engineering genius, proof that survival was not only possible but sustainable in the desert they called home. But engineering alone could not guarantee survival. In a land where drought could mean death, the Nazca also turned to their gods. Their worldview blurred the boundaries between nature and the divine. Mountains were not just stone, they were sacred beings. Rivers and winds were spirits to be respected, and the stars above were pathways for divine power. Their art, preserved in painted pottery and woven textiles, reflects this worldview. Gods with feline fangs, supernatural beings with wings, and animals that carried spiritual significance. Every object was infused with meaning, every design a symbol of connection between humans and forces far greater than themselves. It is within this context that the Nazca lines begin to make sense, not as random images carved into the ground, but as part of a cultural conversation with their environment and their gods. The desert, silent and vast, became their canvas. Where others might have seen emptiness, the Nazca saw opportunity, an eternal stage where symbols could be carved and preserved, visible to the divine forces they sought to appease. Consider the silence of their world. Unlike forests or grasslands filled with sound, the Nazca desert was eerily quiet. No flowing rivers, no rustling leaves, only the wind moving across stone. In such silence, even the smallest ritual act became amplified. A procession across the plain, voices chanting in rhythm, offerings left in the dust. These were not minor gestures, but cosmic events, inscribing human devotion into the eternal stillness of the desert. To carve a line into the earth, then, was not just an act of design. It was an act of faith. It required labor, organization, and community cooperation. Groups of people would align stakes, stretch ropes, and clear stones, their movements coordinated like dancers in a ritual performance. As they worked, they were not only creating images, they were binding themselves together, reaffirming their shared beliefs and their connection to the forces that ruled their world. The scale of these projects reveals something profound. The Nazca were not an empire with armies and vast cities. They were a network of communities, modest in population compared to later civilizations like the Inca. Yet their devotion was immense. To commit to carving lines miles long or figures larger than entire neighborhoods required more than practicality. It required vision, a belief that the desert itself could be transformed into sacred space, that by inscribing symbols into the earth, they could influence the unseen forces that governed their survival. From this perspective, the Nazca lines are not anomalies or puzzles out of place. They are the natural extension of a worldview where every aspect of existence, water, crops, health, death, was tied to the will of the gods. The desert was their temple, and the lines their prayers, etched not in ink or stone, but in the very body of the earth. This chapter of the story reminds us of something crucial. The Nazca were not simply creating art. They were expressing a relationship with their world, one built on fragility and endurance. To live in the Nazca Desert meant to live in constant negotiation with scarcity, and to survive meant to seek balance through devotion. The lines, then, are not silent mysteries left behind for us to decode. They are voices of a people speaking through the only medium that would last, the desert itself. And so, before we look to the heavens or speculate about alien visitors, we must first ground ourselves in the reality of the Nazca people. They were farmers and engineers, artists and believers. Their lives were woven into the desert, and their survival depended on turning emptiness into meaning. Only by understanding them can we begin to understand why they chose to carve their prayers into the silence of the earth. Creation of the lines, tools, methods, and scale. From above, the Nazca lines appear as feats of impossible geometry. Straight paths running unbroken for miles, perfect spirals curling across the desert, animal figures so large they stretch beyond the limits of human sight. To modern eyes, they look like the work of surveyors with advanced tools, or even beings with the ability to fly. But the truth, as archaeology reveals, is far more astonishing. These immense designs were made with methods so simple that their genius lies not in technology, but in vision. The desert itself provided the medium. Its surface is covered with a thin layer of dark, oxidized stones, baked by centuries of sun. Just beneath lies a lighter layer of soil, pale and dusty like chalk against charcoal. By scraping away the top layer, the Nazca revealed the brighter ground below, creating stark contrasts that are visible even from great distances. The lines required no chisels of bronze or iron, no complex machinery, only hands, stones, and patience. Archaeologists have reconstructed the techniques. Wooden stakes were driven into the ground to mark points. Ropes stretched between them created perfectly straight paths. For curves and spirals, a stake served as a pivot, with ropes acting as giant compasses, producing arcs of astonishing accuracy. Experiments have proven that with just these tools, a team of workers could lay out immense figures with remarkable precision. The secret was not technology, it was coordination, discipline, and the ability to imagine scale on a level few cultures have ever attempted. But if the methods were simple, the commitment was extraordinary. Some lines extend for kilometers, crossing valleys and uneven ground, yet holding their straightness without falter. To maintain such accuracy, workers had to align sighting poles across the horizon, keeping their vision fixed over long distances. Imagine the effort, dozens of people standing in the scorching desert sun, aligning ropes and stakes, carrying stones, scraping earth. The act itself was as much ritual as construction, a performance of devotion as they transformed barren ground into sacred geometry. The durability of the lines is another marvel. How have grooves so shallow, only a few centimeters deep, survived for more than 1,500 years? The answer lies in the desert's silence. With almost no rainfall, minimal wind, and stable conditions, the Nazca Plain became a natural archive. Where forests rot and rivers erode, the desert preserves. The very harshness that threatened the Nazca's survival became the guardian of their legacy, holding their symbols intact for us to discover centuries later. Standing within the lines today, their paradox becomes clear. From the ground, they are too vast to comprehend, stretching endlessly until they vanish into the horizon. You cannot see the hummingbird's wings or the monkey's spiral tail. You can only walk them, step by step, lost in their immensity. From above, they appear like messages written across the earth. From below, they feel like landscapes of devotion. Perhaps this was the point. Perhaps they were not designed to be seen as static images, but to be experienced as living rituals, walked and performed by those who believed that every step brought them closer to the divine. This reframes the question. The lines are not simply works of art or puzzles to be decoded. They are processes, rituals carved into the earth, communal acts that bound the Nazca together. Their construction was not separate from their meaning, it was part of it. The effort itself was sacred, the labor a form of prayer, the desert the eternal witness. In this light, the NAZCA lines become less about what tools they used and more about what they believed. To create them was to inscribe faith into the land, to transform an empty plateau into a stage where gods and humans could meet. And yet, the question lingers. If they could build them, why did they? What were these immense figures meant to express? To search for answers, we must lift our eyes from the desert floor and look toward the heavens, the domain of gods, stars, and cosmic order. Gods of the sky, astronomical theories. For as long as humans have gazed upward, the heavens have offered both guidance and mystery. In the Nazca Desert, where the nights are unbroken by clouds and the air is so dry it feels eternal, the stars would have shone with piercing clarity. Imagine a Nazca farmer standing at dusk, watching the first constellations rise above the horizon, knowing that the fate of crops, the coming of rains, and the rhythm of survival depended on those distant lights. It is here that one of the most enduring theories emerges, that the NAZCA lines were not random figures but astronomical instruments, vast markers aligning Earth with sky. German mathematician Maria Reiche, who dedicated over 40 years of her life to studying the lines, believed that they formed a giant celestial calendar. According to her, some lines pointed toward the sunrise on the solstices, others toward the rising or setting of important stars. The figures themselves, the monkey, the hummingbird, the condor, could represent constellations or celestial beings mirroring the heavens upon the earth. The theory has powerful appeal. In a world where the arrival of water meant survival, predicting the seasons was essential. If the lines encoded astronomical knowledge, they were not only sacred symbols, but practical tools. A geoglyph, aligned with the solstice sunrise, could announce the change of season, the time to plant or harvest, the promise of renewal in a landscape that offered little certainty. Modern studies have tested this idea. Some lines do appear to align with solar events, though not all. The sheer number of lines, hundreds crisscrossing the plane, means that some alignments could be coincidental. Critics argue that the patterns are too inconsistent to serve as a precise calendar. Yet the skeptics may be missing the point. The NAZCA were not building telescopes or observatories in the modern sense. They were embodying a world view, one in which the movements of the sun and stars were not abstract science, but living forces that demanded recognition through ritual. Imagine walking one of those lines at dawn, on the solstice, the horizon glowing with the first light of the sun. The path beneath your feet does not simply lead across the desert, it leads to the rising of a god. The ritual of movement, of alignment, would have carried meaning far beyond measurement. It was about harmonizing human action with cosmic order, about binding the community together under the rhythms of the heavens. Other cultures offer parallels. In Stonehenge, massive stones align with solstices. In Egypt, temples were constructed to capture the light of the sun on specific days. The NAZCA, too, may have been inscribing the cosmos into their landscape, not to measure it with precision, but to participate in it, to make the invisible visible through paths carved in the earth. This interpretation transforms the desert into a theater of the cosmos. The lines are not mere decorations, but pathways of connection, binding earth to sky. Whether or not every alignment was intentional, the symbolism is undeniable. Straight lines stretching toward the horizon, trapezoids widening like rays of light, figures embodying animals tied to celestial myths. For the NAZCA, to walk the lines was to walk within the order of the universe itself. And yet, even as this theory captivates, it does not explain everything. Why such enormous figures? Why animals and spirals alongside straight lines? If the purpose was purely astronomical, why invest so much effort in shapes that serve no obvious observational role? The heavens may have guided them, but the desert itself demanded more. Something deeper, something tied not only to stars above, but to the most vital force hidden beneath the earth: rituals of water and survival. If the heavens dictated time, the earth dictated survival. For the NAZCA, life in the desert was a daily negotiation with scarcity. Rainfall here is so rare that some years bring no measurable drops at all. Crops depended not on seasonal storms, but on hidden aquifers and fragile channels of irrigation. To live was to endure drought, and to endure was to seek the favor of powers greater than themselves. In such a world, water was not merely a resource, it was sacred. Many researchers believe this truth unlocks the meaning of the NAZCA lines. Far from being maps for the stars or landing strips for visitors from beyond, the lines may have been carved as part of rituals to summon or honor the forces of water. Their shapes, spirals, trapezoids, and vast animal figures take on new meaning when seen in this light. The spiral echoes the whirlpool, the unseen currents beneath the earth. The hummingbird, a creature associated with flowers and renewal, appears in the Andes when rains return. The monkey, with its curling tail, embodies fertility and cyclical abundance. To carve these symbols into the desert floor was to inscribe prayers, not in words, but in living icons visible to gods and spirits. Archaeological discoveries strengthen this idea. Pottery fragments and offerings have been found at some geoglyphs, suggesting ceremonial activity. At certain sites, archaeologists uncovered platforms or altars, as if the lines were not just designs, but stages for ritual performance. Imagine the scene. Under the scorching sun, a procession moves slowly along the length of a trapezoid. Men, women, and children walk in rhythm, guided by priests who carry vessels of water or food. Shells from the Pacific coast glisten in the desert light, brought as offerings to the spirits. The sound of chants rises into the silence, voices calling upon invisible powers to release rain or reveal underground streams. In this vision, the lines are not meant to be seen from above. They are meant to be walked. To enter a figure was to step into sacred space, to become part of a story larger than oneself. Walking the spiral was to enter the cycle of life and death. Following the wings of the hummingbird was to chase renewal. The desert itself became a temple without walls, where movement and sound transformed emptiness into devotion. The NAZCA may also have believed that the gods resided in the mountains that towered on the horizon. Rivers, when they flowed, came from these mountains, carrying the gift of life to the plain. Many of the lines point toward these peaks, as though drawing paths of communication between earth and divine. By aligning their rituals with the geography, the NAZCA could symbolically bind themselves to the sources of water and fertility. This interpretation does not exclude the astronomical theory, it complements it. Just as the stars announced the seasons, the lines on the ground enacted the rituals necessary to survive them. Together, heaven and earth formed a dialogue, and the NAZCA placed themselves in its center. Their geoglyphs were not abstract art. They were survival strategies sanctified by faith. To walk these lines today is to feel the weight of that devotion. The silence is overwhelming, the heat unrelenting. Each step reminds us that this was not easy work. To carve these figures required not only labor but belief that such acts could bend the forces of nature, that symbols carved in stone could call forth the gift of water. It is a reminder that in desperate environments, human creativity often becomes indistinguishable from spirituality. And yet, as compelling as this explanation may be, it still leaves questions unanswered. Why such scale? Why images so immense that they vanish from the ground? Were prayers for rain enough to inspire such monumental effort, or is there still another layer of meaning? This is where the mystery deepens and where imagination steps in. For some, the very strangeness of the lines has suggested that they are not prayers to gods of rain or stars at all, but signals, messages for beings not of this earth. Theories of contact, aliens, gods, or visitors. Few mysteries of the ancient world have inspired as much speculation as the Nazca Lines. For decades, their sheer size and enigmatic design have fueled theories that leap far beyond archaeology into the realms of myth, imagination, and even science fiction. Among these, none has captivated popular culture more than the idea that the lines were made not for humans, but for visitors from the stars. The theory took root in 1968 when Swiss author Erich von Däniken published Chariots of the Gods. In it, he argued that ancient civilizations were guided or even visited by extraterrestrial beings and that the Nazca Lines were part of this contact. According to his interpretation, the long, straight paths were landing strips, while the massive animal figures were signals or messages intended to be seen from the air. To millions of readers, the desert was no longer a barren plain, but an alien airport, a site of cosmic rendezvous. The idea spread quickly, capturing imaginations across the globe. Television programs, documentaries, and novels all echoed the same possibility, that the Nazca Lines were evidence of ancient astronauts. For many, the question seemed irresistible. How else could a primitive people, without writing or advanced tools, create designs so vast and so precise that they can only be fully recognized from the sky? Mainstream archaeology, however, has consistently rejected the alien hypothesis. There is no evidence of spacecraft, no artifacts from beyond Earth, no remains that suggest intervention from the stars. The techniques used to create the lines, stakes, ropes, and careful planning are simple, effective, and fully within the capacity of the Nazca people. The persistence of the alien theory says less about the past than it does about us. Our reluctance to accept that ancient peoples were capable of extraordinary achievements without outside help. And yet, the allure of this explanation refuses to fade. The Nazca Desert itself seems to invite wonder. Its silence, its immensity, the strangeness of figures visible only from above, all feel designed to provoke the imagination. For believers in extraterrestrial contact, the lines are proof that humanity has never been alone. For skeptics, they are a reminder of how easily mystery invites myth. Perhaps the truth lies somewhere in between, not in alien spacecraft, but in the recognition that the Nazca themselves were visionaries. Their works are so monumental, so enduring, that they stretch the limits of what we assume small-scale societies could achieve. The fact that their geoglyphs still spark debates about aliens half a century after von Däniken's book is testimony to their power. They were created to inspire awe, to connect the human with the divine. In doing so, they achieved something more. They ensured that their mystery would live on, transcending time, culture, and even reason. It is worth asking why this theory resonates so deeply. Perhaps because it mirrors our own longings. We too look to the stars for answers. We too wonder if someone is watching, guiding, or listening. The alien hypothesis is less about the Nazca and more about us, our hunger for connection, our fear of isolation, our belief that the universe must hold something greater than ourselves. But what if the Nazca were not carving messages for gods or aliens? What if they were writing to us, the future, across the gulf of centuries? Could the lines themselves be a kind of time capsule, a message not to beings from the sky, but to human beings yet unborn? A message for the future? What if the Nazca lines were not meant for gods, or even for beings from beyond the stars, but for us, for those who would come centuries later, long after their world had vanished? This possibility reframes the mystery entirely. Instead of asking what purpose the lines served in daily survival, we must ask what legacy they were designed to leave behind. Unlike textiles or pottery which decay or wooden structures which vanish, the desert offered permanence. The Nazca may have realized that by inscribing their beliefs into the very skin of the earth, they could outlast droughts, wars, and even the collapse of their civilization. The desert became their archive, a place where messages could endure for millennia. Consider the figures: the hummingbird, symbol of renewal and resurrection; the spider, associated with fertility in Andean myth; the monkey, embodying abundance and cycles of time. These were not random choices. Each geoglyph may have been a chapter in a visual text, a story carved not with words, but with images that carried meaning far into the future. Spirals could mark eternity. Trapezoids might represent ritual pathways, while straight lines acted as cosmic bridges. What looks to us like abstract geometry may have been to the Nazca a universal script intended to transcend language itself. We are not strangers to this impulse. In our own time, we have tried to send messages across unimaginable distances of time and space. The Voyager, golden record, carries sounds and images of Earth into the cosmos, hoping some distant intelligence might one day understand. Nuclear facilities are marked with warnings designed to last 10,000 years, crafted in symbols that might communicate danger to people who do not yet exist. These efforts reflect the same desire: to be remembered, to send meaning beyond our lifetimes, to declare we were here. Seen this way, the Nazca lines may be among the earliest human attempts at long-term communication. They are not simply prayers, nor calendars, nor signals. They are memory carved into the desert, a dialogue with the unknown future. To walk among them today is to participate in that dialogue, to recognize that the people who lived here anticipated us and left behind their questions for us to answer. There is a haunting beauty in this idea. The Nazca may have known their world was fragile. Droughts could erase harvests, famine could shatter families, shifting rivers could erase entire communities. Perhaps they feared that their culture would vanish, as so many before and after have. So they turned to the desert, the one constant, the one canvas that could hold their voice against time. And they were right. Long after their temples fell and their people disappeared, the lines endure. Not because they were preserved in libraries or inscribed in books, but because they were carved into a landscape that does not change. The Nazca may be gone, but their silence speaks louder than ever. If this theory is true, then the Nazca lines are not relics of a forgotten past, but bridges to the present. They remind us that human beings across every age share the same longing: to endure, to be remembered, to connect with those who will come after us. We write our messages in stone, in books, in satellites launched into the cosmos. The Nazca wrote theirs in the desert, and now the responsibility is ours: to listen, to interpret, and to carry their voice forward. Reflections in the desert. The Nazca Desert is a place where silence feels eternal. When you stand upon its plateau, the horizon stretches endlessly, and the air carries no sound but the whisper of wind over stone. Beneath your feet, shallow grooves cut into the earth, simple, fragile, almost invisible at first glance. They seem like nothing, and yet, taken together, they form one of the most profound enigmas ever created by human hands: the Nazca lines. Across centuries, these geoglyphs have endured without walls to protect them, without caretakers to preserve them, without even the people who once gave them meaning. And still they remain, as if the desert itself chose to guard them, waiting for us to arrive and ask the same question. What were they for? We have walked through theories, astronomical calendars that tied human ritual to the heavens, ceremonial pathways where processions enacted prayers for water, maps of survival drawn to connect sacred springs and mountains, symbols of myth where animals carried spiritual meaning, even the sensational idea of runways for beings from the stars. Each interpretation reveals something, but none explains everything. Perhaps that is the essence of the mystery. The Nazca Lines are not designed to give us answers. They are designed to make us wonder. In their silence, they remind us of something universal. Human beings across every age reach beyond themselves. We carve into stone, we build monuments, we send satellites into the cosmos, all in search of permanence, all in hope that someone, somewhere, will understand. The Nazca were no different. Their desert world was fragile, their survival uncertain, but their imagination was infinite. They inscribed their devotion into the land itself, ensuring that long after their voices had faded, their questions would endure. And what do these questions tell us? That life, even in the harshest environments, demands meaning. That survival is not enough without story, without ritual, without connection to forces greater than ourselves. That mystery itself is part of the human condition, a bridge between past and future, earth and sky, known and unknown. As the sun sinks over the desert, the figures fade into shadow, nearly invisible in the twilight. To the eye, they vanish, but in the mind, they remain, haunting, mysterious, unforgettable. The Nazca Lines remind us that silence can speak, that emptiness can be filled with meaning, and that sometimes the greatest legacy is not in what we explain, but in what we leave unanswered. And so, the riddle endures. Were the Nazca Lines offerings to gods, calendars for survival, maps of hidden waters, or messages to the future? Perhaps they were all of these, or perhaps they were something we cannot yet imagine. The truth may never be fully known, but in that uncertainty lies their power. They invite us not to solve, but to reflect, not to end the mystery, but to carry it forward. So we leave the desert as we found it, silent, immense, and filled with questions. But before we turn away, one question lingers, as timeless as the lines themselves. What do you believe the Nazca Lines were for? A message to the gods, to the stars, or to us?